There's a particular kind of tiredness that has nothing to do with how many hours you slept last night. It's the weariness that comes from carrying too many opinions that were never yours to begin with. It's the exhaustion of standing in front of a mirror and hearing echoes of voices that don't belong to you. Voices that somehow made their way into your reflection and decided to stay. Maybe you know exactly what I'm talking about. Maybe this morning or yesterday, or sometime in the last week, you caught a glimpse of yourself, and the first thought that entered your mind wasn't your own. It was something someone said once, something you overheard, something that was implied without being spoken, something that lodged itself so deep into your consciousness that you forgot it was placed there by someone else. And I want to start here, in this quiet place of honesty, because I think that's where real conversations about healing need to begin. Not with declarations or promises, but with acknowledgement. With the simple recognition that you have been carrying weight that was never meant for your shoulders. You see, there's a strange kind of cruelty in the way words about our bodies seem to stick longer than words about anything else. Someone can tell you that you're kind, and you might remember it for a day or two. Someone can tell you that your work is meaningful, and it warms you for a moment before fading. But let someone say something, anything about your physical form, about the way you look, about the space you occupy in this world, and somehow that becomes permanent ink on the pages of your memory. And I don't think that's because you're weak. I think that's because you're human. Connection, for belonging, for acceptance. When those things feel threatened at the level of our very bodies, something primal within us takes notice and refuses to let go. But here's where I want to gently offer a different way of seeing this. In the Psalms, there's this beautiful passage where David writes about how intricately God formed him. He speaks of being knit together in the hidden place, of being fearfully and wonderfully made. And I know you've probably heard those words before, maybe so many times that they've lost their texture. But stay with me, because I want you to hear something beneath the surface of that familiar verse. David wasn't writing from a place of confidence in his appearance. He was writing from a place of wonder about his Creator. The emphasis was never on how impressive David was. Emphasis was on how intentional God is. And that's a crucial difference that I think we miss sometimes when we try to apply Scripture to our struggles with self-image. Because if the focus is on convincing yourself that you're beautiful by the world's standards, you're fighting a battle on territory that was never meant to be yours. But if the focus shifts to recognizing that you were made on purpose, with purpose, by a God who doesn't make accidents, then something begins to change inside you. Not instantly, not completely, but genuinely. I've talked to many people over the years who have struggled deeply with how they see themselves physically. Men who grew up being told they were too thin, too short, too soft. Women who spent decades trying to shrink themselves, or expand themselves, or reshape themselves into something that matched. An image that kept changing every few years anyway. Young people who can't remember a time before they felt uncomfortable in their own skin. And what I've noticed, again and again, is that the wound is rarely about the body itself. The wound is about belonging. It's about the fear that there's something fundamentally wrong with you that everyone else can see. It's about carrying this suspicion that you'll never quite fit, never quite be accepted, never quite be enough. And when you live with that fear long enough, it starts to feel like truth. But I want to speak directly to that fear right now, not with empty reassurance, but with something that has weight to it. In the first chapter of Genesis, we read that God created humanity in His own image. Male and female He created them, and He looked at all He had made and called it very good. Not adequate. Not acceptable. Very good. Now I want you to sit with that for a moment, because it's easy to read past it. When God finished creating, He didn't evaluate what he'd made against some external standard. There was no comparison. There was no measurement against anything else. He simply declared the goodness of what he had formed. And you, in your physical form, in the body you're walking around in today, are an extension of that same creative declaration. Not because your body is perfect by anyone's definition, not because you've achieved some ideal state of health or appearance, but because you bear the imprint of a creator who doesn't produce mistakes. Now let me be clear about something, because I don't want to offer you theology that sounds nice, but doesn't hold up under the pressure of real life. Believing this doesn't make the struggle disappear. Knowing you're made in God's image doesn't instantly silence the voices that have criticized and compared and condemned your body for years. Faith isn't a switch that turns off pain, but it can become an anchor that keeps you from drifting into the open sea of despair. It can become a foundation that holds, even when the winds of opinion blow hard against you. And over time, with patience and practice and prayer, it can actually begin to reshape the way you see yourself. Not by denying reality, but by expanding your understanding of what reality actually is. Because here's the thing about the way other people talk about your body. They're speaking from their own limitations. They're speaking from cultural conditioning that has taught them to see human bodies as objects to be evaluated rather than temples to be honored. And their words, as painful as they may be, are not the final word. They're not the truest word. They're simply the loudest word in certain moments. And you get to decide, slowly and deliberately, which words you allow to settle into the deepest parts of you. There's a passage in the book of Romans where Paul talks about not conforming to the pattern of this world, but being transformed by the renewing of your mind. And I think this applies directly to how we think about our physical selves. The pattern of this world when it comes to bodies is endless comparison, constant critique, and the worship of an ideal that doesn't actually exist. But the renewal Paul speaks of is a different path entirely. It's the gradual replacing of those distorted measurements with a truer understanding of value. It's learning to see yourself through eyes of grace rather than eyes of judgment. And that doesn't happen overnight. It happens through 1,000 small choices. Choices to stop scrolling when you notice comparison rising in your chest. Choices to speak kindly to yourself even when your mind offers criticism. Choices to remember, even for a moment, that you are loved not because of what you look like, but because of who made you. I think one of the most powerful things you can do when you're struggling with how you see your body is to get honest about where your standards actually came from. Because most of us have never stopped to trace the origin of our internal measuring sticks. Normal, as obvious as the way things are. But nothing about the way culture defines bodily worth is natural or inevitable. It's constructed. It's marketed. It's sold to you so effectively that you forgot you were ever buying anything. And there is deep freedom in recognizing that you've been living by rules you never agreed to. Rules that have been changed 100 times over the centuries. Rules that vary wildly from one part of the world to another. Rules that when you really examine them have nothing to do with your actual worth as a human being. The prophet Isaiah once wrote about how God's thoughts are higher than our thoughts, and His ways higher than our ways. And I think that applies here in a very practical way, because the way God sees you is not bound by the limitations of human opinion. The way God values you is not contingent on the measurements that culture uses to sort people into categories of more than or less than. In God's economy, your body is a home for a soul that He loves. Your physical form is the means by which you experience this world, serve others, offer compassion, extend kindness, and reflect something of the divine. And when you start to see your body as a vessel for those purposes, rather than as an object to be appraised, something shifts. The pressure begins to lift. Not all at once, but gradually. You start to inhabit your own skin with a little more peace. If you've been encouraged by these words today, I'd invite you to take a moment and subscribe to Angel's Decode channel. Not as an obligation, but as a way to keep these conversations going in your life, to have reminders of truth when the noise of criticism gets loud again. Now, I want to address something that I think doesn't get talked about enough in spaces like this. And that's the way physical self-consciousness can affect your faith. Because for many people, feeling ashamed of their bodies creates a barrier between them and God. It sounds strange when you say it out loud, but it's remarkably common. When you feel fundamentally flawed in your physical form, it can make you feel unworthy of approaching the divine. It can make you feel like you need to fix yourself before you can truly be loved. And that creates this tragic cycle where the very source of healing feels inaccessible because you don't feel good enough to reach for it. But I want you to know that God has never asked you to perfect yourself before coming close. Throughout the Gospels, Jesus spent his time with people who were considered physically impure by their society. Lepers, bleeding women, those with disabilities. He didn't wait for them to become acceptable. He moved toward them in their current state. He touched them when others wouldn't. He saw them, really saw them, and that seeing was itself transformative. And he sees you the same way, right now, in the body you have today, with all its perceived imperfections and real struggles and complicated history. You are not outside the reach of love because of how you look. You are not disqualified from grace because someone once told you there was something wrong with your appearance. You are seen, known, and held. I think there's also something important to acknowledge about the difference between taking care of your body and being obsessed with changing it. Because these two things can look similar from the outside, but they come from completely different places internally. Caring for your body is an act of stewardship. It's recognizing that this physical form allows you to live, to love, to move through the world and contribute something meaningful. It's honoring what you've been given. But obsession is different. Obsession comes from a belief that you are fundamentally not okay as you are. It's driven by fear rather than gratitude. It's trying to earn something through appearance that can never actually be earned that way. And many people exhaust themselves in this pursuit, never realizing that the acceptance they're seeking through physical change can only actually be found through internal transformation, through a change in how they see, not how they're seen. The Apostle Paul wrote about presenting your body as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. And I think sometimes we read that and hear it as more pressure, more demands, more standards to meet. But I don't think that's what Paul meant. I think a living sacrifice is simply a life offered, a body used for purposes beyond itself, hands that serve, feet that go, a voice that speaks truth and comfort, eyes that see the invisible. It's not about the shape or size or appearance of those parts. It's about what you do with them, what you offer them for, whose service they're placed into. And when you start to focus there, on purpose rather than appearance, on function rather than form, on contribution rather than comparison, whole conversation changes. You stop asking, "Is my body good enough?" And you start asking, "What can I do with this body today?" And that second question leads somewhere meaningful. The first question just leads to another mirror. There's a story in the Old Testament about Samuel going to anoint the next king of Israel. He looked at Jesse's sons, and when he saw Eliab, the oldest, tall and impressive, Samuel was certain this must be the one God had chosen. But God told him something that has echoed through the centuries. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. And that wasn't just a correction for Samuel. That's a revelation of how God operates, always and everywhere. God sees differently than humans do. And because that's true, the opinions of others about your body, even strongly held opinions, even loudly expressed ones, even ones that have hurt you deeply, are not the final verdict on who you are. They're just human perspectives, limited, biased, often wounded themselves. And you don't have to build your identity on that shifting foundation. You can build on something deeper, something more eternal, something that has nothing to do with measurements or comparisons. I want to tell you something that I believe with my whole heart, and I want you to receive it not as flattery, but as truth. Your body is not a problem to be solved. It's not an obstacle to be overcome. It's not a project that needs to be finished before you can start really living. Your body is the means by which you're experiencing this moment right now. Now. It's what carries you through your days. It's what allows you to embrace the people you love and do the work you're called to do. It deserves your kindness, not your contempt. It deserves your care, not your criticism. It deserves to be spoken to gently, the way you would speak to a friend who has been through a lot. Because your body has been through a lot, hasn't it? It's carried you through seasons of stress and grief and uncertainty. It's kept working, even when you were angry at it. It's shown up for you, even when you refused to show up for it. And maybe it's time to call a truce. Maybe it's time to stop the war you've been waging against yourself, and consider the possibility that your body is not your enemy. If you found a moment of peace in these words, I'd encourage you to leave a comment below. Not for my sake, but for yours. Because there's something powerful about declaring your intention out loud, about putting into words the new way you want to think and live. And maybe your comment will be the very thing someone else needs to read today, the permission they've been waiting for to stop being at war with themselves too. There's a practice I want to invite you into, and it's not complicated, but it is powerful. The next time you find yourself thinking critically about your body, I want you to pause. I want you to notice the thought without attacking yourself for having it. And then I want you to ask a simple question. Is this thought from love, or is this thought from fear? Because thoughts rooted in fear want to control you through shame. They want to motivate you through self-hatred, keep you small and compliant, and constantly seeking approval. But thoughts rooted in love want to guide you toward wholeness. They want to care for you without condemning you. They want to invite you toward health without making you earn your right to exist. And simply asking that question, simply noticing the source of your internal commentary, can begin to create space between you and the critical voice. It can remind you that you don't have to believe everything you think about yourself. Jesus once said that the truth would set you free. And I believe that applies to this struggle as much as any other. Because the lies we believe about our bodies, whether they came from media or family or past relationships or our own wounded imaginations, those lies hold power only as long as we believe them. But when truth begins to replace them, when we start to see ourselves through the lens of divine love rather than human judgment, freedom follows. Not perfection, not the absence of struggle, but genuine freedom. The kind that lets you walk into a room without measuring yourself against everyone there. The kind that lets you receive a compliment without immediately deflecting or dismissing it. The kind that lets you live in your body instead of constantly observing and critiquing it from the outside. I know this isn't a message that will fix everything overnight. I know you might listen to these words and feel encouraged for a while, only to face the same old thoughts when you catch your reflection later. That's okay. Healing isn't a straight line. It's more like the tide, coming in gradually, sometimes pulling back, but always moving toward the shore. And every time you choose to believe truth over lies, you're participating in that movement. Every time you speak kindly to yourself instead of harshly, you're building something new. Every time you refuse to let someone else's opinion define your worth, you're taking back ground that was never theirs to claim in the first place. There's a verse in Ephesians that talks about being rooted and grounded in love. And I think that imagery is so powerful. A tree that's deeply rooted doesn't panic when the wind blows. It bends, but it doesn't break. It stays connected to its source of nourishment, even when conditions are harsh. And that's what I want for you. I want you to be so rooted in the love of God that other people's opinions, while you might still feel them, don't have the power to uproot you. I want you to be so grounded in truth that the shifting standards of culture feel less like earthquakes and more like distant tremors. That kind of stability is possible. Not because you become immune to pain, but because you become anchored to something that doesn't change. And God's love for you doesn't change. His view of you doesn't fluctuate based on your weight, or your age, or your skin, or your height. He sees the fullness of who you are, body and soul, and he calls it good. He calls you beloved. Now, there's something I want to name for anyone who has experienced not just casual comments, but real cruelty about their body. Abuse, mockery, sustained criticism that felt designed to wound. If that's your story, these words might bring up grief as much as, and I don't want to rush past that. Because healing from that kind of wound is deep work. It's not something a single message can accomplish. But I want you to know that what was done to you was wrong. That those words, whoever spoke them, were not speaking for God. They were speaking from their own brokenness, their own sin, their own pain that they hadn't dealt with, and so they passed it on to you. And you did not deserve it. You were not and are not the thing they called you. And while the memory of those wounds may never fully disappear, they do not have to define your future. You can build a new internal landscape, one word at a time, one truth at a time, one prayer at a time. And God, who is close to the brokenhearted, is present in that work. He doesn't stand at a distance, waiting for you to figure it out. He walks with you through it, step by halting step. There's a beautiful image in the book of Isaiah, where God promises to bind up the brokenhearted and heal their wounds. And I believe He is faithful too. That promise, even when healing is slow, even when we take 2 steps forward and 1 step back, His patience with us is infinite. His kindness never gives up, and He understands, better than we might imagine, what it is to inhabit a body in a world that judges harshly. Because He took on a body Himself in the person of Jesus, and that body was mocked, beaten, spit upon, and eventually killed. God knows physical suffering intimately. He knows what it is to be judged by appearance, to be dismissed, to be reduced to something less than His true worth. And that means when you bring your body image struggles to Him, you're not bringing them to someone who doesn't understand. You're bringing them to someone who understands completely, who has felt the weight of human cruelty in His own flesh. You with eyes of complete compassion and zero condemnation. As I begin to draw these reflections to a close, I want to leave you with something practical. Not a formula, but an invitation. Tomorrow morning, or whenever you next wake up, before you look in a mirror, I want you to take one moment, just one, and I want you to speak to your body, not out of obligation, but out of intention. Thank it for carrying you through another night. Thank it for waking up and being ready to face a new day. Thank it for the breath in your lungs and the beat of your heart, those rhythms that continue faithfully without your effort. And then, if you can, offer it forgiveness for all the harsh things you've thought about it, for all the years of criticism, for the ways you've punished it for not meeting standards it was never meant to meet. This isn't self-worship. This isn't vanity. This is simply the practice of making peace with the body God gave you. And I believe it's a practice that honors Him as much as it heals you. Because when you stop hating what He made, you begin to reflect His heart in a new way. You become someone who sees sacred worth in physical form, not just in your own body, but in the bodies of others too. And that ripples outward in ways you might never fully see. The way you treat yourself affects the way you treat everyone around you. The kindness you cultivate toward your own form translates into gentleness with others. And a world that desperately needs more compassion gains another source of it through you. So if you take nothing else from this time, take this. You are more than what people say about your body. You are more than the measurements and comparisons and criticisms. You are a living, breathing expression of divine creativity, flawed and finite like all of us, but carrying within you something that cannot be reduced to appearance. Your worth is not earned by conforming. Your value is not contingent on approval. You are loved deeply and specifically by the one who formed you. And that love is not based on performance. It's not based on appearance. It's based on identity. On the simple, irreducible fact that you are His. I want to thank you for staying with me through these words, for trusting this space enough to receive something difficult wrapped in something hopeful. If this message has been meaningful to you, consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. Not as pressure, but as gift. Because there's someone in your life, maybe someone you know well, maybe someone you haven't talked to in a while, who is carrying the same weight you've been carrying. And these words might be exactly what they need today. I'm grateful for this community, for the ways we can encourage each other toward truth, for the reminders we offer each other when the lies get loud. And I trust that wherever you are, whatever your body looks like, whatever wounds you're still healing from, God is present with you. He is not waiting for you to fix yourself before He draws near. He is near already. He has always been near. And He will remain near through every season of struggle and every moment of breakthrough. May you walk in that awareness today. May you carry it into every room you enter, every mirror you pass, every thought that tries to tell you you're not enough. You are enough, not because you've achieved some standard, but because you belong to a God who makes no mistakes. And He made you, on purpose, with purpose, for purposes you're still discovering. Go in that peace, and let that peace guard your heart and mind as you continue this journey of healing and wholeness. You are seen, you are known, you are held, and you are loved, not in spite of your body, but in your body.